the Austin Report, sitting in for Charlie McGrath on the one and only Rents Radio Network. Extremely excited tonight. I have an important guest, someone that I've been following for several years now, and a lot of you have probably seen a lot of his articles all over the internet. His name is Michael Snyder. He is the publisher of the economiccollapseblog.com, as well as the endoftheamericandream.com, and his newest website is thetruthwins.com. Also an author of The Beginning of the End, a novel, and I would assume an extremely good book if it's anything close to the hard-hitting articles that we see from him on such a frequent basis. I don't know if you guys watched the markets today, but the Federal Reserve came out and did what was expected. They're starting to pull away the proverbial punch bowl, the monetary heroin, and we'll see how long that lasts. You know, QE1 was supposed to be the one and only, and of course that didn't work well enough, so we had QE2 and now QE3. We'll see just how long the economy is able to continue without the monetary heroin. So I want to go ahead and bring Michael onto the show without further ado. Like I said, I've seen his articles for several years all over the place. He really does a great job, the king of the boil down and the king of the countdown. So, Michael, just wanted to bring you on and let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your history and how you got the website started and came to be where you are today.
Thank you for that fine introduction, Gabe. It's a real pleasure to be with you and to talk with you this evening. And there's a lot to talk about, but just to get the listeners up to speed on a little bit of who I am. I'm a graduate of the University of Florida Law School, and after law school, I went up to Washington, D.C., and I was working right in the heart of Washington, D.C. for a number of years. And when right before I started the economiccollapseblog.com, I was working at a law firm right down on K Street, and people probably heard of K Street. It's kind of right in the belly of the beast. You've got all kinds of law firms, lobbying firms right along there. It's a very famous street there, right in the heart of Washington, D.C. But I was working there, but I was becoming extremely troubled about the corruption I saw all around me, about the direction of this country, and I thought, well, what in the world can I do? I'm just an average guy getting up in the morning, putting his pants on, getting on the metro and going to work. You know, who am I to have anything to say about anything? Well, I thought, what can I do? So eventually I thought, well, what's this blogging thing? Let me try that a little bit. So I started to write. And at first, very, very few people took any notice of what I was writing, but I stuck at it, and eventually an audience built. And then in late 2009, I started the economiccollapseblog.com, and we'd just come out of the great financial crisis, and so many people were losing their jobs and losing their homes, and it really struck a chord because people knew they weren't getting the truth from the mainstream media. And as an attorney, someone with a legal background, I try to really break things down, not just with my opinion, but with facts, with charts, with lists. I tried to write in such a way to prove my case to the average man or woman on the street, and people really responded to that. So I've been doing that now for nearly 5 years, really enjoying it. I love doing it, and I'm so blessed, as you mentioned. My articles not only appear on my websites, but on so many websites all over the internet. They get picked up by websites that are much larger than mine. And, I'm part of the alternative media movement. It's a movement in which this radio show is a part of. We're trying to get the truth out to the American people because you've got this mainstream media which controls more than 90% of what we see, what we hear, our movies, our video games, our magazines, our newspapers, our radio shows. Just about every form of media is controlled by just 6 giant monolithic media corporations, and they have an agenda and they have a viewpoint, and people are getting fed up with that. They're looking for alternative sources of information, and hopefully me and you and everyone else involved in this alternative media industry is providing that alternative.
That's exactly right. And to be completely honest, Michael, that's one of the reasons why we're an advertiser on your blog is because I started seeing your stuff everywhere over the net. I've been a visitor directly to your website for some time, but when I started seeing everyone else starting to pick up your articles, that's a bit of free advertising for me, so I do appreciate that as well. And you do a heck of a job out there. One thing in particular that you've been focusing on lately is what happens to the stock market when the Fed ends quantitative easing. And you have an interesting chart in a recent article. I see that you've updated that article today, but from October 26th that compared the S&P 500 and quantitative easing and how each time the quantitative easing program before it came to an end, the stock market fell fairly drastically. So if you could touch on that and exactly how bad is the punch bowl spiked?
Yeah, well, what we've seen happen since November of 2008, right at the beginning of the financial crisis, the Federal Reserve started up this supposedly emergency program called quantitative easing, where basically they created money out of thin air and injected it into the financial system. And mostly they were buying government securities, they were buying mortgage-backed securities, but all this money flooding into the financial system. And as we can discuss, it's done very, very little to help the real economy. But for the financial markets, for the stock market in particular, it's been a tremendous boon. And so we had QE1, which went from December 2008 to March 2010. And during that time, the S&P 500 rose by 42%. QE1 ends. Investors start to panic because the monetary heroin is cut off. The S&P 500 declines 11%. So the Federal Reserve says, well, we got to do something. So they introduced QE2. From November 2010 to June 2011, the S&P 500 rose 24%. It ends once again. We see stock markets start to decline sharply, 14% decline in pretty rapid fashion. So then they introduced Operation Twist from September 2011 to June 2012. And the S&P 500 increased by 20%. But once again, that ended. Stock market fell about 6%, and then we had QE3. Now, QE3 has been a tremendous success, driving the stock market to unprecedented heights. But today, on this day, the Federal Reserve said, okay, we're ending the taper. We're cutting off quantitative easing completely. So from this day forward, we will watch and see what happens. What happens to the stock market? Is it going to be like the other times where we've seen a decline? Well, the markets are certainly primed for it, without a doubt.
Yeah, and not only that is, like you said, even like you had an article several months ago that as the S&P 500 and Dow Jones soars to historical highs, the wealthy begin to buy gold. And I thought it was fairly interesting when Alan Greenspan came out today. I'm sure you've seen the article on Zero Hedge, and reported that quantitative easing has been a massive failure. I'm paraphrasing, but has been a massive failure, and it would be a good idea to buy gold. I was talking to a client today who asked me, it's just a rock, that we put into a safe, but what exactly is it? And I read him the quote from Alan Greenspan, and it explains exactly what gold is. And Alan Greenspan called it a currency that's outside of the control of government, or a currency that can't be printed and destroyed by government. But if you could touch on that, how sometimes, there's bubble signs everywhere. And you recently wrote another article about the 9 signs in the stock market that we haven't seen before. Everything's pointing to a collapse. That even Alan Greenspan is coming out and telling people to buy gold. If you could comment on that.
Yeah, in fact, that Zero Hedge article, which you just mentioned, I quoted in the article I posted less than an hour ago, and it blew me away because this is a quote directly from the Wall Street Journal about this. Alan Greenspan gave a speech to the Council on Foreign Relations today, And the Wall Street Journal said this is what what he said. Quote, Mr. Greenspan said, gold is a good place to put money these days, given its value as a currency outside of the policies conducted by government. That blew me away because that's what I've been saying. So many people on this radio network have been saying for so long, that the insane policies of the central bankers are going to cause gold and silver in the long run to go up greatly in value, go up greatly in price. Not just so much because gold and silver are changing in value, but because they're debasing our currencies. They're ruining our currencies. So I found it very, very interesting that the former chairman of the Federal Reserve is saying, put your money in gold. I found that absolutely fascinating. But
exactly. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, and the inference there, and what I've been saying all along, is tremendous financial volatility is coming. Crisis times are coming, and we can see in the financial market so many of the same patterns that happened just before the dot-com bubble burst, just before the financial crisis of 2008. They're happening again. For example, if you look at margin debt, I just discussed this in the article that I just posted. Margin debt on Wall Street, there's been 3 dramatic peaks in margin debt over the last 20 years. One of those peaks came in early 2000, just before the dot-com bubble burst. Margin debt, in other words, people were borrowing tons and tons of money to buy stocks with. It surged dramatically, as people were getting into tech stocks, and there was just so much euphoria on Wall Street. So we saw this huge peak, the bubble burst, and then it crashed. But then it built to a peak again, a dramatic peak, in the middle of 2007. We saw this huge surge in margin debt, and then once again, a big crash. The market fell apart, and it's happening again now. The third peak is happening right now. It surged to unprecedented heights. It peaked earlier this year. Now it's sitting up right around that peak. But so the same pattern has happened again. If you look at the chart, it's so clear, but I don't know why people can't see it.
Well, it's part of the reason, as we all know, is that you mentioned those 6 media companies that control the mainstream media, and you might say reality at the same time, even though everything that we see out there is confirming the reasons why we started preparing in the first place. Obviously, I deal in the gold and silver business. I talk to clients every day, and one of the things people are coming disenchanted with is everything that we have been warning about, and that they have even been warning about in some cases, hasn't come true. And my rebuttal to that is, look, if you're waiting for the stock market to crash or gold and silver to skyrocket before you decide you were right, your predictions were right or wrong, take a look at everything else, because everything else out there, the world is moving away from the dollar. We have a major pandemic. There's signs all in the stock market that it's extremely overvalued. The Federal Reserve is just now being able to withdraw the quantitative easing. All of these things that people have been warning about, the U.S. petrodollar coming to an end, the dollar being the end of the world reserve currency. All of these things aren't conspiracy theories anymore. They're happening right now. I mean, it's, people say, when is it going to happen? It's happening right now. And if you're waiting to be vindicated by a soaring gold price or in a crashing stock market, well, you're going to be the last person to know, because everything else out there, the sky is full of black swans. It's only confirming the reasons why you buy gold in the first place. And you have a price that's currently dislocated from reality. So to me, that's a real good opportunity. And I think that's what people need to do at this time is to start preparing for that eventuality, because the signs are all around us. It's the same thing that you mentioned, the 6 media conglomerates. Well, you have an article that you put out earlier this year. If the economy is recovering, why is the labor participation rate at a 36-year low? And that's what we're talking about, fudging the numbers. But if you could touch on that for a second, they say the job market is the one bright spot of the economy. If you could explain, we are coming up to commercial here in a couple of minutes, but touch on that if you could.
Oh, absolutely. And they told us the whole reason for quantitative easing was to help the real economy, to help the poor people on Main Street. But the truth is, if you look at it, it hasn't helped at all. And Alan Greenspan said as much today. So, for example, if you look at the employment population ratio, in other words, it's the percentage of people that actually have a job. And I posted a chart of this in several recent articles on my website. Back in the year 2000, approximately 64.5% of all Americans had a job. And that started to decline up and down a little bit. And just prior to the last financial crisis, as the calendar turned to 2008, it was sitting at 63%. So 63% of all working ages had a job. Now, during the last recession, that number fell from 63% to below 59%. And it stayed between 58 and 59% from the end of 2009 all the way up until just recently. And just recently, it barely ticked up to 59.0%. But we're still vastly below where we used to be. The employment recovery they've been talking about is only a tiny, tiny little bump at the end of the chart. To call that a recovery is really an insult to our intelligence. Or it's something that I just wrote about yesterday. If you look at the rate of home ownership in this country, traditionally, home ownership has been one of the key indicators of the American dream in this country. People are part of the middle class. One of the key things, they own a home. They're able to own a home. Well, the rate of home ownership in this country, it's been declining for 7 years in a row. Throughout this so-called economy, the rate of home ownership has continued to decline. In fact, it just declined again. It's now at the lowest level it's been in 19 years. That's no recovery. It's an indication that the middle class is dying. So the real economy, where people live and work and on Main Street, it's not getting any better. The labor force participation rate, the percentage of people that are either working or looking for a job, is at a 36-year low. It continues to go down through this so-called recovery. The inactivity rate for men in their prime working years, 25 to 54, that's at an all-time high, the highest level that's ever been recorded, about 11.5%, the highest level ever recorded, and it's continued to go up throughout this so-called recovery. So you look at so many of these indicators of what the real economy is doing, and they're either staying stagnant or they're continuing to get even worse. Median household income, it's fallen dramatically in the last couple of years. It's kind of stabilized, but it's stabilized at a far lower level than it used to be. So many of these things, we're doing worse, not better.
Well, it's sort of like if you make if half of the American workforce makes less than $28,000 a year, another important article that you wrote recently, they can't really afford to buy a new house. So perhaps that's why those numbers keep falling. Yeah.
Meanwhile, as the percentage of Americans that are actually employed stay stable, the quality continues to go down. And the number that you just mentioned, I got directly from the Social Security Administration website. They come out with new numbers each October showing, what Americans make. And so if you look at the median income, in other words, 50% make more, but 50% make less. The number is $28,031. 50% of all American workers make less than that per year. And you can't support a middle-class lifestyle on that. You can't afford a mortgage payment and health insurance and supporting a spouse and 2 kids on that. No, it's one of the reasons why today, in almost all families, we see the both parents working, sometimes multiple jobs, just in a desperate attempt to try to pay the bills each month.
That's exactly right. And, it just goes on and on where everything is tied together. You know, you look at the homeowner, the housing market crashing at a 19-year low. Well, perhaps that's because half the country's making less than $28,000 a year. Or you look at the fact that labor participation rate is at a 36-year low. And then you tie in the fact that another important item that you've pointed out recently, you've got ground beef at an all-time high. You wrote an article earlier in the year. If there isn't any inflation, as long as you don't pay or use electricity, gas, or go to the grocery store kind of thing. I forget the exact title of that article, but you throw all of those things together, and it's a perfect scenario for the next economic crisis. But if you listen to the government, there is no inflation. Looks like we're going to break. We'll touch on that when we get back. Stay with us, listeners, and we'll have Michael Snyder from the economiccollapseblog.com on the backside.
The word is out. GetTheT.com. People are waking up to all natural products that help your health. GetTheT.com is the web address to optimum health naturally. Life Change Tea is not just green tea. It is a blend of 8 herbs, specially blended to work and help with your digestive tract. When your stomach feels good, you feel good. Get rid of the yuck that stores up in your colon. Lose some weight naturally. Feel good and enhance your energy. All natural, no caffeine, and it tastes great. Don't wait. Order now at GetTheT.com. That's GetTheT.com. Or you can call us at 928-308-0408. 928-308-0408. Tired of the fear of health loss and sickness? Give your immune system some love. Log on to GetTheT.com. Life's too short to worry and fear. It's time to smile at your doctors naturally. GetTheT.com.
This is Richard Ostro, owner for Carnivora Research International. In 1985, former President Ronald Reagan requested that Carnivora be sent directly to the White House from Europe, where it was manufactured at the time, effectively making him the first American to use Carnivora. He used it successfully for a serious immune challenge, which we are prohibited from mentioning in the United States. I would like to add that he used Carnivora approximately 8 years prior to the onset of his Alzheimer's condition, for those of you inadvertently connecting the two events. Visit us at carnivora.com, now used in 27 countries around the world. Carnivora instinctively seeks out abnormal cells only that don't belong in the body without harming a single normal cell. 100% pure, natural, and harmless to humans and animals. Call 1-866-VENUS-FLY. That's 1-866-VENUS-FLY, or visit carnivora.com. Your immune system will thank you.
Oxygen. It's nature's oldest therapy and plays an essential role in destroying viruses, bacteria, mold, yeast, and fungus, and keeping the human body healthy and strong. Now, you can give your body and your immune system a mega boost of disease-fighting oxygen with all-natural Oxy-C. With so many people now leading a sedentary indoor lifestyle, most are in a chronic state of oxygen deprivation, which sets up a perfect environment for disease, general fatigue, and a host of other symptoms. Oxy-C is yours in simple, convenient capsules. Nothing to mix, nothing to hassle with. Take it with juice or water anytime. Feel a cold or flu approaching? Have no energy or spark anymore? Try all-natural Oxy-C and prepare to be amazed. Oxy-C is only available from New Earth Health Solutions at Rinse.com. Look for the New Earth banner at Rinse.com.
All right, Gabe Elton with Austin Report here with Michael Snyder of the economiccollapseblog.com on the one and only Rinse Radio Network. Again, it's a pleasure to have Michael on. He runs the economiccollapseblog.com, endoftheamericandream.com, and thetruthwins.com. And I got to say, one of the hardest working bloggers out there, brings a lot of cutting-edge information that gets spread all over the Internet, so I'm extremely happy to have him on. So we left before the break, and we were talking about the people who create reality, these 6 major media corporations who put out a story and a storyline that says that we're headed in the right direction. Housing market is strong. Labor force is great. And you should put all your money in stocks and bonds because things are just dandy. But all of us probably that are listening to this show know better. Those of us who will watch this YouTube video after the show know better as well. But moving on to the inflation part, and then I think after that I want to get to probably the biggest story of the year that I think is much bigger than really anything that we've been talking about. But explain inflation, Michael, and you had an article out regarding that inflation situation where you said inflation only if you look at food, water, gas, electricity, and everything else. And that was back in June, and things haven't gotten much better since then. And this is a question that I had for you personally that it really puzzles me. How can inflation be soaring, and it is, while the dollar is at a 5-year high?
That's a very good question. Part of why the dollar is rising is because of weakness in other places. The central bank in Europe has been printing money. The Bank of Japan's been printing money wildly. So, all the central banks around the world have been kind of printing money and doing their own versions of quantitative easing simultaneously. So the U.S. dollar is kind of rising in value compared to those, or it's going down in value less rapidly than some of those other currencies. So that explains kind of some of the dollar's strength.
I like to explain it as it's the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. But without a doubt, the Federal Reserve has been debasing our currency. For example, as our incomes have stagnated, as the quality of our jobs has gone down, the cost of living just keeps going up. You look at health insurance with Obamacare. I just got walloped with a huge rate increase just because of Obamacare. Or then you look at food. The price of ground beef has gone up by 17% over the past year. And that's something that people, that they buy for dinner on a weekly basis. They use in so many recipes. That's a staple food right there. The price of ground beef, 17% in 1 year. And so many things. Whether you're talking about electricity, you're talking about different things that we buy. They keep going up. But meanwhile, the Federal Reserve says, "Oh, we barely have any inflation. There's hardly any inflation at all." Well, what they do, and I detailed this in one of my recent articles, and I used the words of Mike Bryan, a vice president and senior economist at the Atlanta Federal Reserve Research Department. He actually wrote an article, and he described what goes on inside the Federal Reserve, and he gave firsthand account of how what they do is they take things out of how inflation is calculated. For example, if oranges are really skyrocketing, they're saying, well, that's going to distort the real rate of inflation, so we're going to remove that from how inflation is calculated this month. Since the 1970s, the way that inflation is calculated has been changed dozens and dozens of times, and the reason they do it each time is to make inflation look lower. It's not to make it look higher. So if inflation was calculated the way it was back in the 1970s, and you can see, shadowstats.com, John Williams keeps track of these things, it would be up around double digits. And everyone would be talking about all this horrible inflation we have is just like the 1970s. But because they purposely manipulate the numbers, they purposely keep changing the way inflation is calculated, it's essentially meaningless at this point. But anyone who goes to the grocery store, anyone who pays for bills on a regular basis, they know that things just keep going up. My wife and I, we went to the grocery store recently, and just one cart of food, and we were purposely looking for things on sale, trying to cut corners, trying to, do what we could to save money. One cart of food was over $300. When we got up to the register, I felt like asking the cashier, what organ do you want me to donate to pay for this? you know?
And, that hurts the poor the worst. And it wouldn't be such a bad thing if wages were rising as fast as the price of ground beef, but that's simply not the case.
Oh, not at all. Our median household income is far lower than it was, say, back in 2007 before the last financial crisis. Meanwhile, inflation has gone up throughout the entire time period. So this is squeezing the middle class. I kind of compare it to like a really bizarre reality show where people keep getting voted out of the middle class. Everyone's looking around wondering who's going to be next.
That's right. And you could even equate it to the Russian, I believe it was in Russia, and the Russian gulags. I paraphrase, but they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I didn't stand up. Or they came for the trade unionist, I wasn't a trade unionist, and then they came for me, and there was no one left to stand up for me. One thing that I think is a bigger story than anything that we've talked about, we've talked about domestic issues here, but my personal stance on this, and one thing that I'm focused on throughout this year and I've written about myself, is the fact that the world is moving away from dollars. They're finding an alternative to the dollar. There's deals being made almost on a daily basis, but certainly on a weekly basis amongst countries to transact trade in other currencies other than the dollar. So my stance is that the Federal Reserve is becoming more irrelevant by the day. We can think that they're doing something magical. Everyone waits for the Fed minutes to come out and then goes and trades. Gold fell $15 today. But I think that's so irrational and short-sighted because the Fed doesn't have any tools left in their toolbox. What are they going to do? Cut rates again? It's impossible. So here we stand with the whole world waiting on news from the Fed to decide what their next trade is going to be. Meanwhile, the rest of the world has decided that they can do math too, that they're never going to be repaid on their debts, and are making headway into doing away with the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. And you touched on that back in May, talking about the de-dollarization and how Russia is on the verge of dealing a massive blow to the petrodollar. Describe some of their deals with China and the rest of the world and how we're becoming more irrelevant by the day.
Yeah, this is such a huge long-term trend, and the effects of it aren't necessarily felt immediately. But this is a huge sea change. This is such a dramatic shift because for decades, the U.S. dollar has been used as the de facto world currency all over the world. Virtually all oil and natural gas around the world has been bought and sold in U.S. dollars. And most of the other trade around the world, for example, say the country of Chile wants to trade with South Korea. Most of the time it's going to be done in U.S. dollars. And so what this has done is created a tremendous demand for U.S. dollars. And today most people don't realize this, but more dollars are used outside of the country than are used inside the country. And so this creates a tremendous amount of demand for our currency and boosts the value, keeps it artificially high, much higher than it otherwise would be. And so this is good for us. We can go out and we can import tons and tons of imported goods at extremely cheap prices. We can go to Walmart and the dollar store and we can fill up our carts at ridiculously low prices, and that raises our standard of living. But what happens as we go and buy all this stuff from overseas, then what ends up happening is we have to go to these countries and ask them to lend that money back to us so we can pay our bills, our government, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've been able to have them lend this money back to us at super low interest rates, which is
you're going to break right here, Michael. Sorry for that hard break, but we'll see you guys on the backside and finish that thought.
When you think of getting old, what comes to your mind? Spending the last years of your life in a nursing home? Staring out a window? Medicated to keep you docile? Not able to recognize your own kids? Suffering with some dreaded disease until you die all alone? Well, think again. One of the premier doctors in the world, Dr. James Forsythe, wrote the book Anti-Aging Cures. life-changing secrets to reverse the effects of aging, your key to the real fountain of youth. And Suzanne Summers, the perpetual face of eternal youth, wrote the foreword. As mentioned in the book, Royal Velvet is the most cost-effective, easiest, and complete way to reverse the effects of aging. It's true. So, do you want glowing skin, less wrinkles, thicker hair, less gray hair, your hormones balanced, improved memory, a toned physique, greater energy, less pain and stiffness, as well as benefits too numerous to name? Go to RoyalVelvetNow.com. Click on the rinse icon in the upper right-hand corner, and within a couple of days, you can be on the path to youthful living. RoyalVelvetNow.com. Your life will never be the same.
Charlie McGrath of WideAwakeNews.com here with a question from my friends at Austin Rare Coins and Bullion. What do they know that we don't? Insiders and a who's who list of elite have made it crystal clear that we are headed for catastrophe, putting out warning after warning, urging people to batten down the hatches. Billionaire George Soros has recently been dumping stocks and at the same time acquiring millions in gold. In fact, in a recent interview, he was quoted as saying, "I'm not here to cheer you up. The situation is as serious and difficult as I've experienced in my career." Out of control government deficit spending and a Federal Reserve that's only solution seems to be print more fiat currency will lead to a weaker dollar and massive inflation on necessity items such as energy and food. If you have wealth to protect, please visit my friends at Austin Rare Coins and Bullion. Gabe Elton and the folks at Austin Rare Coins and Bullion have many Wide Awake News customers because they're honest, they're fair, and they won't sell you paper promises or product they do not have. Call Gabe Elton at 800-552-4109. That number again, 800-552-4109, or visit them online at austincoins.com.
Make a promise, take a vow, trust your feelings, it's easy now. Understand the voice within and feel it change.
All right, Gabe Elton here with the Austin Report. I've got Michael Snyder from the Economic Collapse blog sitting in for Charlie McGrath of Wide Awake News and on the one and only Rinse Radio Network. Sorry for that quick cutoff there. We were just talking about de-dollarization and how the rest of the world is moving away from dollars and how that has been a great benefit to us for a number of years. And that's always been the one thing that everyone has warned about. You know, when that happens, for lack of a better word, there's going to be hell to pay here in the United States. We've been able to export our inflation and live as a consumer economy. And I think that's coming to an end soon. And that's one of the things that Michael Snyder has been warning about for quite a while now. Again, the publisher of the economiccollapseblog.com, endoftheamericandream.com, and thetruthwins.com. So to get back on that subject, and I want to use your own work to back you up in case other people haven't read this, but I think this is all part of the story. As you, and I think it's the most important story that people aren't really looking at this point in time. It was sort of a bigger story earlier in the year, but it's continuing to happen. And just a few of the headlines are: the almighty dollar is in peril as the global de-dollarization trend accelerates. That was written back in July. And then another article that I think it proves what it has enabled all of this is, and I go back to a publication that we put out earlier in the year, and I received a lot of flack from it, saying that it was scaremongering. When the title was, "Is this the beginning of the end of the U.S. dollar?" And the report talked about how the U.S. is no longer the world's largest economy, and I got a lot of flack for that statement in particular, but I had known about a study that was done that used purchasing power equity to compare GDP, and it wasn't a month or two later when Financial Times came out and announced, yes, China is now the world's largest economy on purchasing power parity. And not only are they the world's largest economy, they've surpassed America in lots of other ways as well. So you have Russia, who is the world's largest energy producer. You have China, who is the world's largest economy. between them and India, they have the major population of the entire world. The gold is moving east. The manufacturing is moving east. Industry is moving east. It's becoming the new financial center. And all of those things are prerequisites to the U.S. dollar losing its status as the world reserve currency. And they're all happening. It's not something that might happen or that could happen. It's happening right now, and I think that's the most important story of the day. But if you could tie that together, Michael, we just finished our last commercial of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And because of the problems in Ukraine that we've seen right now, with the controversy between the United States and Russia, and the Russian government and the big corporations over in Russia, they've come to the conclusion that, hey, we've got to become less dependent on the U.S. dollar. We've got to become less dependent on the U.S. financial system so that they can't hurt us. We've got to look out for our own interests. So we've already seen Gazprom, for example, one of the largest corporations in the world, huge natural gas dealer. They've started converting many of their largest customers from paying in dollars to paying in euros and other currencies. Russia started discussing with China, hey, let's do these energy deals and let's cut the U.S. dollar out of the equation. And these big powers are saying, why should we be dependent on the U.S. dollar anyway? China accounts for more global trade. It's not only the biggest economy on a purchasing power basis, but China already accounts for more total global trade, imports and exports, than the United States does. So China is saying, well, we're kind of the big dog now. Why do we have to use the U.S. currency to deal with? So they're looking to make some changes. And China in particular has been making agreements all over the world, these currency exchange agreements, to start to cut the U.S. dollar out of the equation. So the petrodollar monopoly, it's already been broken by Russia. We see China making these moves to become more independent of the U.S. dollar. And it's not going to happen overnight, but we're seeing this shift take place. It is taking place right now. The dollar is becoming less important on the global stage, and that's going to hurt us eventually at some point, because our whole standard of living is so dependent on the rest of the world continuing to play our game. Because right now we buy far more from the rest of the world than they buy from us. So we consume far more wealth than we produce. But having the reserve currency of the world allows this to happen. And then what we do, since we have such a huge outflow of dollars, we go back to these other major exporting nations and we say, oh, please lend our money back to us so we can fund our deficits, we can fund our exploding debt, the government, the debt. People hear, oh, the U.S. and the national debt's under control. No, it's not at all. In fact, in fiscal year 2013, which just ended at the end of September, the U.S. national debt increased by more than $1 trillion. The official deficit is like $400-something billion, but that's because of accounting gimmicks where they've said, okay, this isn't going to count toward the deficit. That's not going to count toward the deficit. But if you look at the official numbers, the amount our debt actually increased, it was by more than $1 trillion last year. And under Barack Obama, our national debt is projected to approximately double during his 8 years.
And tie that into one of the most interesting articles I've seen from you recently. I in fact, might have covered it on an earlier show. The U.S. government is actually borrowing about $8 trillion a year, and how they're financing that.
Yeah, and most people, when they think of the government borrowing money, they just focus on the new money that the government's borrowing, the difference between what the government's spending and what the government has on hand. So, yeah, like I said, in fiscal year 2013, that amount increased by more than $1 trillion. So the government had to borrow that. But every year, the government also has trillions of dollars of debt coming due that it needs to roll over. In other words, all these old debts that are coming due, they've got to borrow more money in order to pay those off and to keep things going. So, for example, last year, the U.S. government borrowed approximately more than $8 trillion. It was more than $1 trillion in new spending, but then about $7 trillion in old debts that were coming due that had to be paid off, and they paid it off by taking out new debt. And the reason for this is what the U.S. government figured out during the Clinton years and the Bush years, that, hey, if we shrink down the time frames that we're borrowing money, we can pay lower interest rates. We can reduce our borrowing costs. So they started to do this on a massive basis. And so now, like I said, we have more than $7 trillion of debt coming due each year that has to be paid off, and that's paid off by these new debts. And so in order to keep this game going, we have to have the rest of the world continue to lend us trillions of dollars at ultra-low interest rates. If at some point the rest of the world says, we're not going to do this anymore, we're going to be in a massive amount of trouble.
And that is exactly what is happening with deals between China and the rest of the world, and China and Russia. You know, I often say you have the World Bank, who has their idea of the next world reserve currency. You have the International Monetary Fund, who has their idea of a SDR as the next world reserve currency. And now you have the BRICS Bank, who has their idea of the next world reserve currency. But one thing that's not in any of those discussions is keeping the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. And when you have those types of things coming to an end, you're looking at major changes for the United States economy and for investors. And everybody should take a real close look at that. Another article you wrote back in September, as the Dow and S&P soared at irrational highs, meanwhile the ultra-wealthy rushed to buy gold bars. And you talk about how over there in Britain they said gold sales of gold bars were up over 200%. And, you know, the people in the know are the rats are fleeing the ship kind of thing. And a lot of them are finding their way into gold. And when you have people like Alan Greenspan, people like George Soros, people like other billionaire investors that you see, Mark Faber, they are looking out there. They know what you know and what I know and what many of our listeners know, Michael, and that's that I think this is another important article, is 5 U.S. banks have $40 trillion in exposure to derivatives. And when those derivatives come to an end, it's going to be a loud shebang. And when you tie it in with the world moving away from the dollar, you've got a double whammy. And when you've got a market that's already dependent on quantitative easing, you have a triple whammy. And it just seems like a perfect storm is brewing. If you could talk about that derivatives exposure.
Oh, absolutely. Most people have absolutely no idea how vulnerable our banks are, how vulnerable Wall Street is. The last financial crisis, we were told, too big to fail. That's such a major problem. We have these banks. If they fail, they're going to ruin our economy. We're going to do something about that. Nothing was done. In fact, the too big to fail banks have collectively gotten 37% larger since the last recession. We're talking about banks like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, etc. At this point, the 5 largest banks in the country account for 42% of all loans, and the 6 largest banks in the country control 67% of all banking assets. So if you kind of remove them from the equation, we don't have an economy. We don't have a financial system, essentially. And so you would think that these big financial institutions would be careful, but instead what they've done, they've transformed Wall Street into the biggest casino in the history of the planet. They've become more reckless than ever. In fact, 5 of them, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and Morgan Stanley, all 5 of them have exposure to derivatives contracts that is in excess of $40 trillion.
Now, and just to clarify, that's over 200 trillion. It's 40 trillion per bank.
Yeah. JP Morgan Chase leads the way with exposure of more than $67 trillion. So it's crazy. And it's the same thing over in Europe. In fact, German banking giant Deutsche Bank, they've got exposure to derivatives that's about $75 trillion. So
It's just amazing and mind-boggling. I mean, I'm sitting here and laughing under my breath when you bring up these ungodly figures. It's $1 trillion seconds is over 300,000 years, and one bank has more than $70 trillion in exposure to derivatives. It's mind-boggling to say the least, Michael. I really appreciate you coming on tonight. We are coming to an end of the show here, and I want all of the listeners, and this broadcast will be going out to my clients as well. Visit Michael's website, theeconomiccollapseblog.com. Visit our website, austincoins.com. See you guys in 2 weeks, and thanks again for listening. Thank you for coming on, Michael.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, sir. Good night.
Bikes, roads, inside your market, your shops, your clothes. My dad, he's got a lot of fear, I know, but enough pride inside, nothing let that show. My brother had a book he would hold with pride, a little red cover with a broken spine on the back. He hand-wrote a quote inside, when the rich wage war, it's the poor who die. Meanwhile, the leader just talks away, stuttering and mumbling for nightly news to be played. The rest of the world watching at the end of the day, both scared and angry, like what did he say?
You have been chosen, yes, you, to discover for yourself what thousands have already experienced, the most life-changing health product in the world. It's called Royal Velvet, and there's nothing else like it. Royal Velvet users testify to receiving hundreds of benefits, from reversing the effects of aging to mental clarity, as well as noticeably improved sleep, energy, libido, overall health, and so much more, including saving lots of money. This is the real deal, that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that you will regret if you don't act upon it. Honestly, there is an extremely limited amount of raw material, making it available only to a select few, a very select few. So find out why you have been chosen. Go to RoyalVelvetNow.com, click on the rinse icon in the upper right-hand corner for an incredible surprise. Oh yeah, if you place your order before we run out of them, you will receive the eye-popping but simple-to-read book that tells you how to live in divine health, and it's free. RoyalVelvetNow.com.
In 2007, one man, Mike Dillard, made 5 predictions which forecasted the 2008 economic crisis and the pending Eurozone collapse. 3 brand new, shocking, must-watch videos with predictions for the coming year. www.the3videos.com. Over the past year, Mike Dillard has helped thousands of ordinary people create and recover wealth by tapping into the black box investing strategies the big banks don't want you to know about. www.the3videos.com. As the European banking system implodes and governments collapse at breakneck speeds, the next 12 months will be the most anticipated and important months in modern human history. This will make 2008 look like a walk in the park. Everyone will be affected. Go to www.the3videos.com now. Learn how to prepare your family and prosper during the global financial collapse.
You're listening to the Rents Radio Network, nationwide and worldwide on the net and at rents.com.